My client was accused of trafficking 15 kilograms of cocaine. What could be better than assisting someone in that situation and trying to put them on the right path?
I entered the system thinking it was broken, and if I just did a better job, I could fix it. I wanted to have faith in the system.
Judges have different swaths of reasonable doubt. What's reasonable doubt to one is not reasonable doubt to the other.
Those are the cases that keep me up at night, because it's like, if I lose that, what's left?
I've seen some of your wins. They're really impressive.
We're doing well. We're doing well over here, for sure. Why would we want to create a culture where we are implicitly encouraging criminality within the system that's supposed to be fighting against it? If you could change one thing in the criminal justice system, what would it be? Welcome back to another episode of Who Judges the Judge, the podcast. I am here today with Ryan Handlarski, a colleague of mine that I am super excited to have on the show. He's another criminal defense lawyer, so we're going to speak a little bit about practice. He is also a legal gun owner, so we are going to speak about what that's like, especially in today's climate. Super excited.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Thanks for coming down to this show. I really appreciate that.
All right.
It's interesting. I reached out to you first and foremost because of a program you're running right now for some of your clients who have successfully beat their cases.
Yeah. So I started a program or initiative called Acquittal Suits, where I'm going to certain clients who there's certain criteria I want them to meet. We win the case. Their charges were significant. And I'm buying them a suit. Here's your suit for the future for your first job interview. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Giving multiplies. I really believe giving multiplies. And I'll tell you this about my clients. So my first two that I did were murder clients. Now, there's obviously some murder cases where you're going to be representing a really, really bad guy, a psychopath. These two clients were like lovely. They were unfailingly polite. They were, really good-hearted people. Like, these were not bad people who were both charged with murder.
I get it. I think, people don't believe that we as criminal defense lawyers see people who are in the worst possible situations only because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. And they're really great humans that just got caught up.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I believe giving multiplies. I truly believe that. Like, it's never a bad thing to give. But what could be better than assisting someone in that situation and trying to put them on the right path? Hey, here's an outfit for your first job interview. Yeah, it's been fun. I'm happy to do it.
I love that. When did you start this initiative?
I started, there was a particular client, the first one who I represented. It actually started, so he was acquitted of a murder, and then the Crown pursued a gun case against him. So there was it was the type of situation where it was a gun in the car. Somebody was killed, and there were 4 people charged, and my client's DNA was on the firearm, which they chose to, in the end, pursue that charge separately.
Okay.
So he was somebody, he was like, I can't stress, he was so polite and grateful to me, which is not everyone who you represent.
I know.
So, it's like not everyone we represent. Some of them have character flaws, but he wasn't like that. So it actually started because he still had the gun trial coming up.
Okay.
And he comes from financially challenged circumstances. Like, I saw what he was wearing. What he was wearing was perfectly fine. But I really wanted to get him a suit for his gun trial. So I did. And he wore it every day of the trial. And it ended up being, I won it on an 11B issue. It's one of, actually, it's been cited a number of times because there's this whole thing happening in the Superior Court in Toronto where they triage, you show up for your trial, there's no judge available.
I mean, that's always been the case. We had that in Brampton. left, right, and center before the pandemic. Come on, we had
Like it is
the
now,
judicial
though?
pre-trials with Justice Durno, him trying to figure out which judge could possibly maybe hear us, maybe not.
I don't know. No, I
I mean, it's
remember
gotten worse, but
it's gotten worse. Like I
yes.
remember the pre-trials with Justice Durno. They always figured it out for my cases for
Okay.
whatever reason. So, but recently in Toronto, it's like, no, we don't have a judge for you.
Yes.
So my client was in that situation. There was no judge. It was adjourned, and I ended up winning it on an 11B issue. And this guy wore that suit every day to the trial. So I was really happy I could help him. I thought he was a very deserving person, and yeah, I've continued it. So I hope to continue for a long time.
I
Hopefully.
love that, the acquittal suit. It's so great.
Acquittal suits.
And so, you represent people on murder charges. You represent people on gun charges. You do sex assault cases.
A lot of sex assaults.
A lot of sex assaults.
A lot of sex assaults.
You've been practicing for how long?
16 years,
Wow.
Which is just like time flies. I think you may be a year ahead of me. I think you're a 2008.
No, behind. So I'm a 2008 call, but I didn't start in criminal law until 2010.
Okay.
So I'm heading into my 15th year of criminal practice.
Right.
And then later this month, so on February the 23rd, I'm celebrating 10 years of having my own practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 5 years at a firm and then off on my own. And you have a similar trajectory, right?
I only was with a firm for a year and a half.
Okay.
So I realized early on in criminal defense, because we had like the Bay Street experience.
Yes.
I could see why it would be very difficult to make what I thought I was worth at a firm. And it's not because like firm owners are greedy or, I worked at a firm, I worked at one of the biggest Bay Street firms, McCarthy Tetro. They would do a motion for TD Bank. Very straightforward motion. I'd see the bill. They'd pay like 40 grand for that very simple motion.
Right.
And they'd pay, and I'd be sitting there thinking to myself, they billed 40 grand for that very simple motion. So if you're billing that, if your client is TD Bank, you can put like one or two associates on it and pay them a lot of money. But in criminal defense, you're dealing with people who don't typically have access to those sorts of funds. So like the money isn't just there to throw one or two or three associates on a file and, pay them a lot of money like they do on Bay Street. So when I figured that out, like the only way to do it, at least as far as I was concerned then, is to do it on your own. And then you're getting paid for, for the trial that you do but it's more real. It's closer to real life.
Fair. And now you have your own firm.
Now I have my own firm.
You've got a partner. You've got how many associates now?
I have one associate.
One associate.
And I had a summer student who just left. But but yeah, it's I'm happy. I'm happy with it. I started it in 2011, so I'm coming up on my 14th year with my own firm.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
It was a struggle for you to leave Bay, like a personal struggle.
It was a personal struggle. So I always tell people I had a eureka moment on my honeymoon. I got a lot of bad advice from the older generation.
Of lawyers,
of parents' friends, like got a lot of bad advice. You can't ever make any money in criminal defense. Bay Street is, like where it's at. And I can't say I blame them for that older generation. Like you said, Bay Street, and it just kind of connects that, oh, that's successful. Bay Street is successful. Having a criminal defense practice is not. And then when I went on my honeymoon, it was totally unrelated, but I had started my defense practice and it was like going pretty well. I was way happier even then when I wasn't making a lot of money than I was on Bay Street. And I read a book by Richard Dawkins called The Greatest Show on Earth.
Okay.
It has to do with all the evidence for evolution. But because Richard Dawkins is a famous atheist, he's like always asked, well, if religion isn't true, why do so many people believe in it? And he gave this answer that I thought was really interesting. He gave the answers, it's a vestigial trait. So why does a moth go towards a flame? Because moths use the stars to circumnavigate, And they've been doing that since before fire was created. So they still have this vestigial trait, and that vestigial trait causes them to barrel into a flame.
Wow.
But then he says, for humans, it's the vestigial trait of listening to your parents, listening to your elders, especially when they adopt a solemn tone. Ryan, work on Bay Street. Bay Street is the measure of success. Bay Street is where you're going to make the most money. You're never going to make any money as a criminal defense lawyer. And I realized I'm genetically programmed to listen to my parents, to listen to my elders.
Right.
But the problem is my elders may not know what they're talking about. My elders may be using circumstances that existed 30 years ago when they came of professional age.
Right.
Like, think about how different it was for our parents' generation to start a business, to be an entrepreneur than it is now. So when I realized that, I was like, holy shit, everything clicked. And it sort of freed me of all of that stuff that had been weighing me down for a really long time and making me miserable.
And it had pushed you, we spoke a little bit. Your undergrad was in business.
Yes.
And you hated business.
Hated it.
But you stayed in it because you thought that's what you were supposed to do. And so was law school just an extension of you having studied business, or did you always want to be a lawyer? Like, where does that come from for you?
No, I knew I wanted to be a criminal lawyer.
Okay.
It was the O.J. Simpson trial.
Really?
Yeah, O.J. Simpson, that trial changed my life. And it wasn't all the things that most people were focusing on. Like, I still remember it. It's one of the best memories I have of being in grade school. So I think I was 13 at the time, and I'd watched Barry Scheck's cross-examination. DNA was brand new. They made a lot of mistakes in the collection of DNA, and there were strange things happening. Like one of the key pieces of evidence were the socks, which had OJ's blood and Nicole Brown's blood on it, right on his bedroom floor. The problem was, in the initial search, there's no socks. That's the famous moment of the trial where Barry Scheck says, "How about that, Mr. Fung? Explain that," right? Like, explain the socks, not there on the first search and there on the second.
Right.
And then the blood had a chemical compound that's more commonly found in the lab, or, So I just remember watching the trial and thinking to myself, I would have quit. It didn't, because a lot of people were talking about the racial issue. I'm like, I don't know. I would have quit. And then one of the lead detectives brought a vial of O.J. Simpson's blood to his residence. So, like, you find all that out. And, as we know, most people don't actually know this stuff. Like,
Right.
Most people are making snap decisions without knowing the evidence. I actually knew the evidence, at least better than most of my colleagues. I'm like, I think I would have quit. My friends were like, "You're crazy. He's going to be found guilty." I'm like, "No, I think he's going to be acquitted." And then I remember they made an announcement. We're all going to gather in the library and watch the verdict. And people started chanting, "OJ, OJ." We were in grade school. We were kids. And then when the jury said not guilty, I start looking around at everybody's stunned faces.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, okay, this is where I want to be. And business was sort of like a deviation. The funny thing is about it, I remember if you ever watched Steve Jobs in his commencement address to Stanford.
Okay.
It's a beautiful thing to watch. And one of the things he says is you've got a little voice inside you that already knows what's right for you. And the funny thing is, I knew these things were not going to work for me, and I did them anyway. So, to be freed of that when I was about 29 was a turning point for me.
I mean, you're in good company, right? I started in civil litigation, not because that's what I wanted to do, but because my mom did not want me to be a criminal lawyer.
Right.
I didn't get to law school until I was 25. And by that point, I had already been, involved heavily in drug subculture for close to 13 years in one way or another. I mean, I started acting out when I was 12 and, using at 13. But by the time I was 16, 17 years old, deep, deep, deep entrenched in street life, and sort of come out of that and get into law school was so huge and such a bright star in my mom's life. And all she wanted was for me to get as far from that lifestyle as I possibly could. And she saw criminal law as being this sort sort of stepping stone from where I had just left. And she's like, I don't want any of this.
Right.
And it was more not telling me I had to, but begging for me to please get away from anything criminal. And so I listened. I wanted to make her happy.
Right.
I had made her obviously very unhappy for a very long time, and was like, okay, you know what? Let me really make her proud, not just like a little proud. And I tried. I articled in civil. I spent my first 2 years of my career in civil litigation. And then went out, my cousin Leora one night, as you know, also a criminal defense lawyer. And she started asking me about my cases. And halfway through my, explanation of my biggest case on the docket at that time, she looked at me and said, I'm so fucking bored listening to you. There's no way you enjoy doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I was just like, wow, if you can feel that from me. And it had been brewing inside me for a long time.
Right.
Just like this disconnect between what I was doing and what I was supposed to be doing.
Right. But, it kind of scares me to this day. Like there's a Jordana Gold list out there, a version of yourself that didn't do this, like that just stayed to make your parents happy. Like how many people get stuck, right? Like you got the bad advice. Like, I often think about it. You got a mortgage, you had a kid, and you never had the courage to do the thing that voice inside you was telling you to do. It like, sometimes I wake up and it's like, holy shit, I'm lucky that all this happened for me, because I totally believe there's a version of myself out there where I got stuck in that trap and I was just miserable. And
I think that's a lot of people. I think a lot of people settle for what they're supposed to be doing instead of pursuing what they know they want to be doing.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of like the disconnect and the unhappiness that we're seeing around us.
Right.
What's the best case you ever won? The case that you won that even thinking about it today just makes you feel good for having won.
I got a case. It was my client was accused of trafficking 15 kilograms of cocaine. And, I got, it was him and his brother who were charged. And there was another guy charged. That person had some notoriety. And if you remember the 2016 NBA playoffs, someone got kicked out of the arena for heckling LeBron James.
Okay.
That was him. And that person ended up being killed in his Range Rover in broad daylight at Yonge and Eglinton. And it left only my client and his brother charged. And, like when you start dealing with those amounts, the stress is huge, right? Because you're looking at, more than a decade behind bars if you're found guilty. He was the driver of the vehicle that had 15 kilograms of cocaine transported. They knew that 15 kilograms of cocaine had been transported. The receiver of the cocaine had pled guilty. So it was just my client and his brother left. And I told my wife, I'm like, if I lose this case, I'm quitting. Like, I'm quitting criminal law.
I think we all say that at some point in our careers.
I don't know. I couldn't
Maybe once a year.
Maybe once a year. You're right. But this one, I was just like too close to it. And it was in front of a jury. And the jury was out for, I think it was like 4 or 5 days.
Oh my God.
I was on pins and needles. And then they came back not guilty. That's the one. That's my favorite one that I needed. Like sometimes the defense are like, I need this win. That's the win that I needed that win. And thankfully that was nearly 10 years ago and I'm still practicing. So
and you're still excited.
Yeah.
You're still excited talking about it. Like we all have those wins that it's just like such good wins.
Which one's yours?
My best wins are the wins where I know the judge doesn't want me to win, but I think the client should win. Okay. I remember doing this one case at Toronto Superior Court. Client was charged with being in possession of a firearm. Client had an extensive history with Toronto police, including having served 11 years for running away from the police and shooting at them as he tried to get away and was unsuccessful in so doing. Did not bring a charter application. We contemplated it, ultimately decided that the warrant would likely stand. And so we were in front of a jury arguing and only arguing about whether or not he had knowledge and control of a gun. And the police on sort of takedown day had seen that there were a number of people going in and out of his house that day. And so a number of people had access to his home. And one of his friends had said, that was my gun. I had it there. He didn't know it was there. I had it underneath my clothing. And there was some evidence from the police to support that finding. And when the police came in to arrest my client at his residence, because of his history with Toronto police, they immediately tasered him. They didn't even stop to try to arrest him properly.
Okay.
It was an immediate tasing. He fell to the ground. And so we sort of had in our back pocket this idea of, potentially after trial, if he was convicted, to bring an excessive force application. But we wanted to see how the trial itself would play out, because we knew we were in front of a judge who did not like this guy one bit. And it was a very, very difficult time in sort of the 361 makeup of whether or not we were going to get a judge who would actually be sympathetic given his background. That was sort of the toss-up, right? So during the trial, there were times in which I felt like I could push the button on this excessive force and question the police about their use of excessive force. And every single time I hit that button, the Crown was on his feet saying, this isn't relevant, this isn't relevant. And I just thought it was, that the jury should know the way that this guy who at the time had not been found, with anything. It was this belief that he was in possession of a firearm. I thought they should know how he had been treated. And I just got such kickback from it. The judge, when it came time for defense evidence, wanted to have the jury given a Vetrovec warning. Now, you know what that is.
Yeah.
For listeners who don't, it's essentially a warning to the judge about an unsavory witness, except it can't be used against defense witnesses. And I had to actually bring law and argue this point. And so this judge was just hell-bent on getting a conviction. Anyways, we closed to the jury, and I was nervous. There was a lot on the line for this guy. I knew that if he had been convicted, he was looking at a significant sentence.
Yeah.
And he had no faith in the system. Understandably so.
Right.
For a lot of reasons. He was just born into the life, came from a racialized, marginalized community from the time he was a youth, sort of initiated into gang life, and was born and raised to have no faith in the system for good reason. And I wanted to instill that faith in him. And it was almost like, I'm going to show you that there can be justice. It exists. And almost at the time, I hadn't even opened up my own firm yet. It was very early in my career. I wanted to have faith in the system.
Right.
I entered the system thinking it was broken, and if I just did a better job, I could fix it. But around year 2 or 3, I started thinking that the system is working exactly as it was designed to, in a way that I found very disheartening. And so there was a part of me that needed to have that faith in the jury system.
Right.
And the judge sent the jury out to deliberate at 5:00 on a Thursday before the August 1st long weekend.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
They don't usually do that.
They never do that. And she just didn't give a shit. She's like, no, I'm going to do everything I can to force a conviction immediately. Anyways, they were out until 9 p.m. on Friday of a long weekend. There was no one there. It was me. At the time, I smoked cigarettes. I was chain smoking with the construction workers outside of 361. They were giving me company. Anyways, we get the call that the verdict comes in. We come in, and I just I'll never forget the tension in the air, because me and the Crown did not get along either on or off record.
Yeah.
The level of animosity was just so thick.
It happens.
Not just between me and the Crown, me and the judge. The judge was trying to side with the Crown as much as possible. You want to talk about putting your finger on the scales of justice in a way to really create some significant imbalance for my client. And I worked so hard. Anyways, they came in and they acquitted him of all charges.
Wow.
And it was just me and him. And I'll never forget, I was young and ignorant. And so I sat on the table after the jury was excused. I sat on the table with my back to the judge, talking to my client until she left the room, because I just couldn't even look at her.
Wow.
I just felt she had done so much to create this horrific imbalance in favor of the Crown, who already has the benefit of the state behind him.
Right.
That I was just so appalled but so happy for my client, and turned around and I looked at him and I said, see, sometimes it works out.
That is
And he
awesome.
just beamed, and I had to like call his people to arrange a ride to pick him up. Like he had no one there for him.
Right. He was in custody, I
He was
take
in
it.
custody the
Yeah.
entire time. He never had bail. So it was like 2 years, waiting for his day in court, and I walked him out.
Wow.
So that for sure was one of my best, I think, because I just felt like I really was that underdog battling,
You were.
the system
I've
itself. It wasn't even just like a
I've
piece of it. It
I've
was
been
just
there when the
the
judge is
system.
putting their
Yeah.
thumb on the
Yeah.
scales. Like you usually, the truth is,
Yep.
you usually don't have a story of vindication. Usually, and especially there's judges who know how to do it in a very clever way.
Yes.
So the fact that you got vindication from the jury, I mean, first of all, a testament to the importance of the jury system. My goodness. Jurors always impress me. So the fact that they're willing to talk about your client's life, your client's case until 9 p.m. on the Friday of a holiday weekend
Was huge.
like it's amazing. The people, they really do want to do justice. They're conscientious. And of course, we don't know what they are talking about. We're not allowed to know. But I've seen it. Like I remember I did a trial just before COVID. It's the only hung jury I've had. It was just before COVID. It was my case and the Kalen Schlatter case.
Okay.
The building was empty. It was a ghost that you couldn't believe because the emergency had been declared.
Right.
There was nobody there. And those jurors were out, like talking about my client's case. First of all, the judge asked them if they wanted to stop. They said, no, we want to continue, which I thought like, wow, and then they were out for, I think it was 3.5 days before they declared a hung jury in the middle of an emergency had been declared. Like we're all supposed to be at home. I don't know. I mean, I think that jurors, like your story, that is a testament to the jury system.
Absolutely. I've had a few where I've thought, you know what, these 12 people with no legal training, no legal education, are given a set of instructions from a judge that, they may or may not fully understand, because I find some charges are just confusing. Sometimes the evidence is lengthy. Sometimes, the law is complicated, and sometimes unnecessarily so. But, to see them really, really work hard and come to, a fair result that makes sense on the evidence and that applies the law properly, that's huge. I give credit to them.
Yeah.
I'd love to sit on a jury. We can't, unfortunately.
But
I would love to.
I'd love to know what
I'd love
they
to
talk
see what
about.
everybody talks
about. What do they talk about? I mean,
know.
what are they talking about for 4 days?
For days. Days and days on end.
Yeah. I don't know.
What's the worst case you ever won? So the case that you won that you wish you hadn't.
I don't think there's ever a case that I wish I hadn't won.
Really?
Yeah, because the way I think about it, I always find it interesting because I do a lot of sex assaults. There's so many sex assault cases where you look at the evidence and it doesn't accord with common sense. Okay. You're like, and you're not allowed to even make those arguments anymore. Like, oh, that's doesn't accord with common sense, to which the Crown says that is a myth as to how the victim of a sex assault would behave. But I've had like these cases where, like, I had one recently which went to a jury trial in Newmarket, where after the sexual encounter, he drove her home. They kissed her goodbye. She texted something like, thanks for the ride, looking forward to doing it again. She pursued, she texted him to get together again, and he kind of blew her off. And 3 days later, there's a complaint to the police. He sexually assaulted me. So what I find interesting is, think about it from my client's perspective. It's a sex assault with penetration, which is going to get you in jail, 5 years, if you're found guilty. Does anybody ever ask the Crown, ever, do you ever feel bad about prosecuting these innocent people with no criminal records charged with sex assault?
I would. I would love to. I'd love to put a Crown in the hot seat and say, like, how do you fucking live with yourself?
Nobody asked
when
that.
but they should. They should. I mean,
my job.
I know. We all get asked how we sleep at night.
But I sleep very well.
Me too.
Because I know that I'm doing my job properly.
Same, but you don't have one case that you think, like, I probably shouldn't have won that.
No, but
Interesting.
I don't, but I can say what keeps me up at night. I sleep very well because I know I'm doing my job properly. But what keeps me up at night is I've seen, acquittals that should have been convictions and convictions that should have been acquittals. Like that's what's fascinating about the criminal justice system. Like, what is reasonable doubt?
Yeah.
Reasonable doubt is what a judge, if we're talking about a judge alone trial, like I think you get closer to what reasonable doubt is with the wisdom and common sense of 12 members of the public.
Agreed.
That's reasonable doubt. But for a judge alone trial, I think what people don't understand is judges have different swaths of reasonable doubt. What's reasonable doubt to one is not reasonable doubt to the other. So that's what actually keeps me up at night is these judge alone trials where, of course, the lawyer you hire makes a huge difference and the facts of the case make a huge difference. But the judge you draw, I mean, I'm not sure the public understands how important that factor is. So
They don't. Our clients don't either. I mean, I try to express it as sort of diplomatically as possible, but the reality is like that's everything. That said, I mean, I've drawn judges where I was told it's impossible to win. I've brought in charter applications in front of judges where, colleagues or people in that jurisdiction have said to me they don't even understand the charter. You're never going to win this. And, it takes a battle and it takes a lot of arguing, but I've won those cases. I think that a good legal argument will often result in a very fair decision from judges. I find by and large, I feel like I win what I'm supposed to win legally from,
yeah,
applying the tests. Um, for me, I think the most stressful cases I do is when I really, really believe that the client should be acquitted on the law. And I think that some of them that I think are so blatantly obvious, I don't even understand how the Crown can be prosecuting. Those are the cases that keep me up at night because it's like if I lose that, what's left?
those
Like
are those are the
how is that?
toughest.
Those are the
The
worst.
innocent
Yeah.
client, the one who's like, I'm innocent, and you're like,
Well, factually innocent is different from like legally should be acquitted. Like I have clients that are not factually innocent. Like we're talking, gun in satchel on them.
mhm.
So like factually very much in possession of a firearm, but like rights being so horrifically
Oh,
violated
I see what
and
you're.
so many rights being horrifically violated. I mean, I have a case right now where I'm just waiting on a judge's decision where clients' rights were horrifically trampled. Like it was an illegal detention, an unlawful arrest, an unlawful search, failure to give rights to counsel, like a laundry list of breaches that in my mind, it's a very easy decision that should be made excluding this firearm, but maybe it won't be.
Yeah,
I don't know.
those are tough.
Those are the
Like,
worst for me. Those are the cases that keep me up where I'm like, holy shit, what happens? Like I've done absolutely everything I can, but this needs to be the verdict. And I think we all have those where it's like so obvious what the right verdict is, but you have a crown that's hell bent on getting a conviction of at all costs, and perhaps a judge that's sick of seeing people with firearms come through their courtroom
yeah.
and they don't care about anything other than the fact that the gun is a gun.
Well, that's the criminal justice system. That's the randomness of it. So we know that. I'm not sure the public knows that, but judges are different, and yeah, the judge you draw is going to have a critical difference. Though you're winning a lot, so I've seen some of your wins. They're really impressive.
We're doing well. We're doing well over here for sure. For
They're
sure.
not. I mean, they're not easy.
No.
Like to
No,
win
they're not
charter
easy.
cases on those bases.
Yeah.
Like you're probably winning them much more often than most other defense lawyers are winning them, which is like interesting. Good for you. Like but it's not like you may be winning them and judging your cases by a standard that most lawyers aren't. Like, I always find it interesting talking to defense lawyers. Here's my contention, okay? If you go to trial routinely, you're in like the top 30% of defense lawyers. If you're winning them, you're in the top 15% of defense lawyers. Like you're winning them with some frequency. I always find it interesting if I meet a defense lawyer colleague and I start asking them questions. Have you ever done a voluntariness voir dire? Have you ever done a Section 8 application that's been successful, Section 7 or Section 9? Have you ever run a jury trial? Like, I encounter a lot of defense lawyers who've been practicing a long time. It's like, no, I've never done that. And I'm all,
Really?
yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know.
Interesting. Do
Yeah,
you do gun bails?
I do gun bails.
What do you think when you're sitting in court on a gun bail? And I ask this because I do a lot of gun bails as well. And you get the crown that stands up with their fucking statistics about shootings in Toronto, and inevitably at some point, because it's all the same members of the gun bail team, they will say that the only reason handguns are designed is to kill people. You're a legal gun owner. I'm a legal gun owner. I shoot handguns, like I sport shoot. Do you as well?
I do as well.
So I hear that and I just cringe every time because I get it. My client, who's also probably caught with some drugs, isn't legally allowed to have a firearm. And we can argue about, the fact that the gun was found in their waistband when it shouldn't have been there. But this notion that the only purpose they're designed for or the only purpose they're possessed for is to kill drives me crazy because I have a whole collection and I don't own any of them to kill people.
Yeah, I can one up you there with that example. Like what your example makes me think of is when I have like a legal gun owner,
right?
Or somebody who's got a purpose, who finds himself in bail court with the gun bail team opposing his release. Like I had this guy who was making parts for firearms,
okay,
which is totally unregulated.
Yes.
So you're allowed to make scopes, you're allowed to make slides, you're allowed to make barrels and sell them. It's totally unregulated because, like, as you know, a firearm has a definition. It's got to have the moving parts and it's got to. I show up with this poor guy who's got like this small business. He had been in custody for 5 days with the gun bail team. They don't even understand that what he was doing was not against the law. Like I had to go return, like all I was doing was like, hey, this is not a firearm. It's legal. It's unregulated. But there's a member of the gun bail team who's citing these statistics who just they have no idea what's going on. So yeah, I mean, we have to separate potential, legal uses of gun. Like they don't even separate legal gun owners who are charged. It's the gun bail team who will show up. That's the craziest part.
I know.
And yeah, in terms of like uses for guns, like, I don't know, I like guns. It's a hobby. I belong to a gun club. I'm obviously not doing it to kill people. We have neighbors to the south. You may have noticed they have a Second Amendment. They like their guns. They believe in gun ownership. They believe owning firearms is the sign of a healthy society. Like you may agree or disagree with that, right? But you can't say that there's no lawful use for guns. And really, if you like, there's sort of, I always think in the United States, like there's some, element of it is just like, it's just about being self-sufficient and self-reliant. It has to do with the history of
protecting yourself from overreach of the government, right?
Protecting yourself from the reach of the government, protecting your home and property, right? Like things that are, they're good things. Like, again, you can have a debate about it. But to say that the only purpose is to kill people, it is. It's like, come on. But you're going to hear it. And I don't know. Like, it doesn't make me angry anymore. It's just like, all right, here come the statistics, and then those statistics really have to do with the tertiary ground on bail anyway. And so, there's a balance of a number of things. And I'm not sure that one is too weighty. But yeah, I hear you. There's firearms owners in this country are under attack.
Oh, and we have been for years
not
now.
Respected. Like, it's just totally, what percentage of gun crime has to do with legal firearms? I mean, it's like, it's negligible. I don't know.
I know we're being targeted, and what kills me right now, I mean, I was up, early this morning and reading about this new 25% tariff that Trump is going to now place on Canada.
Yeah.
And all of our trade. And he's citing the fentanyl that is apparently coming from Canada into the United States. I don't know. I think that we're supposed to be blaming the pharmaceutical in this pharmaceutical industry for the opioid epidemic. But leaving that aside, I don't understand how our government is not, in turn, and in what they're calling retaliation, because now they're going to put this tariff in retaliation, but no one's speaking about the fact that for the last 2.5 years, not a single legal firearm has entered Canada because the Liberals have banned, completely banned, legal handguns from being imported, exported, transferred, traded, purchased. As legal gun owners, we can't have any more handguns. We're done. The stores cannot import them for sale. So the only way that they are getting across our border is from the South. They're coming up from the United States. We know that. We're seeing unprecedented numbers of handguns in our streets. And yet there's this deafening silence that I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, hey, you want to testify before Parliament, which is not sitting, then, but yeah, they're obviously the flow of, and we have to be precise that it's the prohibited handguns, the stuff that's showing up in crime in cities like Toronto.
Well, even the restricted, it's any handgun.
Yeah, any handgun.
Any handgun. It's not just prohibited.
No, right. Yeah, any handgun.
Any handgun. We have been.
I agree.
There's no handguns that have been legally allowed to cross into Canada for 2.5 years, and yet our market is flooded with them, and they're all coming from the States.
For sure they are. So yeah, I don't know, but I don't know what to.
So I don't understand how we're being punished the way that we are when it's an equal trade.
Yeah, but there probably is a lot of fentanyl crossing at the border from Canada to the United States. Like we keep hearing about these huge fentanyl busts and fentanyl labs in Canada. So there probably is a lot of that going on. Like the trucking industry in Canada became very suspect, I believe, over the last several years. I don't think it used to be. But, there have been investigations about it, but like, it's interesting, there are a lot of policy changes that the government could make that they don't. And I don't know, we're not politicians. I'm just a lawyer. I'm just a defense lawyer.
I know, but it's interesting because as a defense lawyer, like we're actually in the trenches looking at crime statistics play out in front of our eyes every single day. And no one's actually taking apart what the real problem is. Like, I don't doubt that fentanyl is coming across the border from Canada into the United States. I have no doubt that those statistics are accurate, but it doesn't end there, right? That's not where the conversation starts and stops. We have fentanyl perhaps flowing south. We know that we have firearms flowing north in unprecedented amounts. And then we have stolen vehicles leaving our country in like numbers that have been unheard of for the last few years that are literally being packed onto cargo ships and sent out of the port in Montreal. Like our borders really are porous.
Yeah, they are.
And none of the news media is covering any part of that. We're focusing on these tariffs and how the tariffs are going to destroy us. But this has been coming for a long time.
It has been coming for a long. I mean, I would agree with that exact characterization. This has been coming for a long time. Why people didn't prepare for it, I'm not sure. Like
and why we've been targeted as legal gun owners, I'm not sure. The legal gun community has been under attack since May of 2020 when they started, outlawing like hunting rifles.
Yeah, it's all theater.
It's crazy.
Right? Like it's all theater. It's like we are doing something about the problem.
Right.
It's like that's all it is. Just look at what our government is doing about gun crime. We're like, we just banned another 100 firearms.
Right.
It obviously does nothing, but it allows someone somewhere to say we did something. This is what our government did. The truth is, it would have been hard to prepare for these tariffs. You would have had to do a lot of stuff, So, like, why it wasn't done, I don't know. But I'm not a politician, so it's not my forte. But like this, the attack on legal gun owners in particular is really just, it does nothing to prevent gun crime. It does nothing to prevent the flow of firearms onto the streets of Toronto, Vancouver, other cities. So why they do it, I don't know.
If you could change one thing in the criminal justice system, what would it be?
One thing in the criminal justice system.
Yes. What's the one improvement? If you do anything to the system, what would you want to see happen?
The only thing that really, like, in general, I love being I love being a defense lawyer. Like, I consider myself very blessed to get to do this. And in general, I think our criminal justice system works pretty well. Like, I think we're lucky. If I have a friend who's a criminal lawyer in the United States, and if you've ever dealt with American clients who got repatriated, they don't run trials there because they put them in a situation where, okay, if you plead guilty, you'll get 5 years, and if you're found guilty after trial, you get 30. So what are you going to do?
Right.
Right? Like, even if you're innocent, what are you going to do? There's a lot of plea bargaining there. They don't run trials like us. So I think we're very lucky we still have that. You can run trials and the Crown doesn't hold all the cards. But, like, I would say I spend a lot of my time on, like, administrative shit. And it's getting better, right? Because think about how much time was wasted before Zoom on these administrative court appearances. So it's actually getting better. But I really think you could cut out all the bullshit. Like, you show up after like a month and it's like, all right, we're setting this for trial. So, like, a lot of these 11Bs, that even the ones that I'm winning, it's not my fault. It's all the bullshit you make me do, like all these administrative appearances and all these, like, forms you make me fill out. That's probably my biggest frustration in the criminal justice system. Other than that, like, I'm enjoying running trials and arguing interesting things. Like, there's always new things that come up, and that's what I really like about it. There's so much variation in our job. So yeah, on the whole, that's the main thing that I'd change, because administrative things drain a lot of my time and energy. What about you?
Well, I would probably change the whole system if I could. Um, I think that the public believes there is a system of rehabilitation and reintegration that does not actually exist. I think that the system is designed to keep people stuck in the revolving door criminal justice system.
How
Arresting
so?
arresting someone at 12 or 13, putting them on probation that they know they absolutely are never going to be able to meet, charging them with breach of probation, putting them in jail, telling them that they can plead guilty to get out of jail, which any 14 or 15-year-old will do, starting with them with a criminal record. They now get arrested again because the system has done nothing to help address the underlying issues that caused them to enter criminality in the first place. Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's a broken home, maybe it's anger that's just been brewing as a result of generational traumas that have never been addressed. But we don't do anything as a system to address any of that. And so inevitably the person is arrested again, and now they've got a criminal record that includes breaching a court order. Maybe they don't get bail this time. When they don't get bail, they're more likely to plead guilty. They
Right.
plead guilty, they come out, they get more probation. They still can't make it to their probation officers' meetings because of a number of factors. Maybe they're not capable of keeping time. Maybe they've got a younger sibling at home in a single parent household that they need to look after, and there's no way that they can juggle all of the responsibilities they have as, now a 15 or 16-year-old kid. And so now they're charged with breach probation again. They get out on bail. They breach the bail. Now they're back before the system again, breaching their bail. And so they've got all these breaches, and, inevitably, lawyer will tell them, hey, we'll wrap all of this up together. You just have to plead guilty to 3 or 4 of these 6 charges, all of which are poochy in nature, and you don't have to worry. Probation again, breaches again. Like, this cycle just perpetuates until eventually, they spend so much time out of school dealing with these court situations, they're kicked out of school. And now they got to work. They can't really get a job because they
Right.
have a criminal record. Like, we see it time and time and time again, and nothing changes. And eventually they go in front of a judge and the judge says, well, you're a recidivist. You keep coming back in front of the court.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, because you fucking did nothing to address any of the underlying issues that brought this person to the court system in the first place. And we see so many people that are lost in the system because the system is designed to keep them coming back. And these numbers are they're just sad. It's just so unfortunate that we don't take the time and effort to help address the underlying causes of criminality for so many of our clients who, we started this talk, they're really good people. I've represented so many good humans that are just making such poor decisions because they think that their ability to choose is so short. There's so few options that they think are available to them that they're picking the best of a series of bad options. And, I've said for a long time, it costs approximately $100,000 to house an inmate in a federal institution. That changes province to province, but on average, about $100,000 per year. Imagine if we took that same $100,000 that we would spend incarcerating this person and put it to the front end of their life from 0 to 12 before they're at an age where they're arrestable, right? Here in Canada, we can't arrest someone before they're 12 years old. And imagine instead of, having them grow up in an impoverished household or a household with addiction, or history of violence, instead we improve their education system, we improve their access to medicals, we improve their access to, counseling for intergenerational trauma, which we know we see time and time again as being one of the, key causes of especially violence, but criminality in general. And we gave them better options. I think that we would see a lot fewer people in the penitentiary at the end of that time period.
I
And we
like it.
don't do it. We
No,
just don't do it.
I like
And it doesn't have to cost anymore, and it's not about hug a thug. It's about let's do a better job of giving people the ability to make better choices and keep them out of the system from the start.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. But the other thing I'd say, the thing I find interesting, because you said, like, if I could change anything, I would just make like everything freer. I've met so many people, good people, especially who are charged with drug offenses. If I go back to my 18-year-old self and think about like what I had to do to become a lawyer, I didn't like it. And I had like, it took, how long does it take? 4 years of undergrad and 3 years of law school and 1 year of articling. And then like another couple years before you start making money. Like if you're an 18-year-old coming from, say, a single parent home who's really struggling financially, that is very daunting. Like it's not impossible, obviously, and some people have done it, but that's really, really hard to do. And, I just think like the idea that you take some of these 18-year-olds, like say an 18-year-old, particularly in like the people accused of drug trafficking, they're smart. Like if you gave them opportunities, they'd take it and run with it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, my clients sell drugs. They're business people.
They're business people.
They're entrepreneurs. They're
That's
smart.
right.
They know how to sell. They could sell anything. A lot of times, though, when they get to a point in life with enough of a criminal record, they feel like everything else is precluded from possibilities that they could actually pursue.
Well, then they're not wrong. And even if they don't have a criminal record, they still have barriers.
Yes.
So,
But that's where, like, I think the rehabilitation and reintegration piece is missing, right? First of all, we don't do enough for kids from the ages of 0 to 12 to ensure that they don't end up in the system. And then you have the 12 to 18-year-olds that, are often used right now as mules and pawns. And we see that time and time again. I'm
Yeah.
seeing it increasingly. And so, again, the system fails to address the underlying issues and just sort of sends them on their way. And I don't even blame, there's some horrible probation officers out there, but there's also some amazing probation officers that would love nothing more than to do better in helping address these underlying issues, but they can't. They're so overburdened. They have such a high workforce.
Yeah.
And, we need, as a system, need to do a better job of making sure that what is the point of probation? Are we just monitoring someone's criminality, or are we actually wanting to help?
Right.
And I don't think we want to help. And we want people to keep coming back in because that's what feeds the system.
It's an interesting thought. I guess what you're saying is that there's actually an economic incentive to keep them going.
There is.
Wow.
It employs all of us in the system. Think about it. If we had a significant decline in inmates, how many jail guards would be out of a job? How many people that work the prison systems would be out of a job? How many judges? How many lawyers? Court staff? Transcriptionists? Like, think of all of the personnel that is needed in order to run this system.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting thought. I guess you've
Nothing else makes sense to me.
Right.
Doesn't make sense. Why would we want to create a culture where we are implicitly encouraging criminality within the system that's supposed to be fighting against it? Nothing else makes sense.
There's always the two options when you're dealing with those sorts of questions, which are like a nefarious intention or incompetence. And I always err on the side of incompetence.
So. We have some of the brightest minds in the country at the top of the food chain making these decisions. We're not leaving the decisions of the entire structure of the criminal justice system. I mean, situated in the States, right? The start of mass incarceration was the end of slavery. And the slaves were then arrested for minor offenses in order to populate the jails, which were then turning out the same workforce as the plantation. Right? When you look at the history of mass incarceration, there's no doubt that it started as a means to propagate this sort of economy.
It sounds like you know the history better than I do, because I thought it was more Richard Nixon, war on drugs.
It's way before then.
Okay.
It's way before then.
Okay. Well,
look at the history of mass incarceration after the Emancipation Proclamation. It's actually really frightening. The history of mass incarceration starts at the very end of slavery in the United States.
I'm not.
It was the inmates who were working the mines and building railroads across America. Okay. It was forced free labor, which is exactly what the slaves on the plantations were.
I'll have to.
And starts in the same states.
I hate Richard Nixon, by the way, because he took the United States off the gold standard. There's like I'm a Bitcoiner, so that's one of the reasons I hate him. Because what does it do? The whole war on drugs, like, what does it do to a family? When for a marijuana offense, you break down the door and you arrest the father in front of the children and the wife. So
you're gonna love one of my episodes coming up. I'm interviewing a gentleman who spent 18 years in custody for marijuana trafficking, and he now owns a farm and legal dispensary.
Oh, wow!
Selling marijuana and marijuana products, which actually helped him beat cancer. And so, so the very drug that put him in jail is the very drug that saved his life, cured him, and which he is now cultivating and selling. So,
well, there were a number of police officers. I will keep that sounds awesome. But there's a number of people who made a lot of money on marijuana who spent years prosecuting and policing. So, look out for that one.
It's an interesting debate for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. So much fun.
Okay, good. I'm glad you enjoyed. Thank you so much, everyone who's tuned in. Another episode of Who Judges the Judge, the podcast.